Good evening. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, June 8th, 2016. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First up is the approval of the minutes from the May 10th, 2016 meeting. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Oxley,
Second.
second by Likens. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
If you don't mind, Chairman,
Sure.
I would like to introduce those who did not get to meet Mike before the meeting started. This is Mike Ferencek. He is our new city planner, and he's been with us now 3 weeks? Yep. 3 weeks, and he's doing a fantastic job, and we're really glad to have him on board.
Welcome.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
You previously, I believe you mentioned you were at Sure before that, Orland Park?
That's correct.
Yeah, so you,
Yeah, it was great to be able to join you guys here. It was really nice. Thank
okay, glad to hear it's working out well. Christiana was hard act to follow. Okay, Pam, the case here, the zoning ordinance.
Thank you. This first item, case number 2016-002TA, is a text amendment to the city's zoning ordinance related to a couple different sections. The definition section, the permitted use table for all districts except C4, as well as the permitted use table for the C4 downtown commercial district. Last year, due to an influx of calls that the city had been receiving about where and if we allowed vape and e-cig shops, the city council passed a resolution the early part of this year, 15097, that had imposed a moratorium on tobacco, head, and smoke shops, which also did include vape and e-cig shops until July 1st. With the introduction of alternative nicotine and products and vapor products, and little regulation at this time, a lot of communities have been really evaluating these types of uses and where they would be appropriate from a zoning standpoint and to what level are they appropriate. So during this moratorium time period, staff has conducted extensive research. We've looked at the zoning ordinance, which you'll be talking about this evening, as well as will be making some recommendations to the municipal code. As you may recall, this original issue of tobacco head and smoke shops was addressed in 2014 when the city had done a previous text amendment and we consolidated these types of uses. The city presently has 2 tobacco shops, both of which are located on 9th Street. 3 vape shops, 2 of which are located on 9th Street and 1 which is located on North State Street. All of them do have some sort of lounge component, and what that means is they allow sampling of the vape product, as well as opportunities for people to kind of sit in comfy chairs and at tables to kind of vape. There are also 2 additional vape shops, both of which are located on Archer Avenue in the county. Our ordinance is technically silent on the lounge concept, so we will be discussing that this evening, as well as any other kind of smoking lounge. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background, through the course of this research, we looked at what the federal level was doing as well as the state level. When this was initially presented to the council for discussion purposes only, because they wanted an update on where staff was with respect to our research during the moratorium period. The day after we had made our presentation, the FDA had made a ruling in which that they were now going to look at vape products, electronic cigarettes, cigars, hookah tobacco, pipe tobacco, and other nicotine gels, that they were going to be extending their definition of tobacco products to include these items. And what that means now, that under this extended definition or expanded definition, products will need to be approved prior to making it to the shelves of retailers. So prior to 2007, which was the time that was identified in the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, certain tobacco products could be grandfathered in. Now with this current ruling, anything that comes on the market after, or has come on the market after that date and currently, will be subject to FDA review and study. By August 8th of this year, the new guidelines will go into full effect. With respect to the Smoke-Free Illinois Act amendment, the state currently has a Smoke-Free Illinois Act. There was an amendment introduced by the House back in 2015, which basically had said that they wanted to ban the use of all electronic cigarettes and vaping products indoors. About a month later, after that initial House bill, the same person who proposed the legislation kind of backpedaled a little and decided to amend the bill to limit it to a ban to just inside school buildings, on school grounds, and inside state-owned facilities. That bill continues to remain in the Rules Committee. It's been there since April 22nd. And I just give you this information just because it kind of goes in line with the whole reason why we're approaching this is that there was so little regulation on this that it's been very difficult for Lockport as well as other communities in terms of how to address these issues. So a couple things that we're going to do with our, or we're proposing to do with our zoning ordinance. As you recall, back in 2014, the current title Tobacco Head and Smoke Shops was generated, as well as the current definition. What we're suggesting is that we amend the title and amend the definition to be a little more in line with modern terminology in the use category. So what we're recommending is that instead of tobacco head and smoke shops, that we now refer to these as tobacco shops, alternative nicotine shops, and vapor shops. And under the definition, which is somewhat similar to the original definition, we've expanded it in a certain way. One, we've identified that these need to be pre-packaged smoking and tobacco products. And the reason being is that in the vape industry, majority of them sell prepackaged liquid juice, but there are some vape shops that actually, quote, manufacture or make their own kind of liquid product, depending upon the likings of their customer. So we want to not allow that component. We want it all to be prepackaged. So that's why this has been added to the definition. In addition to that, we've also referenced the municipal code, which will be making changes to expand some definitions of alternative nicotine products and or vapor products. So this way it refers back and kind of combines the two codes. We've maintained the, what primarily engaged means, but we've also added a last section that says that this definition does not include a section or department of a larger commercial establishment or any establishment with any type of liquor, food, or restaurant license. The city currently has about 22 tobacco licenses that have been issued. And some of these facilities, like your CVS, like your Walgreens, they do sell e-cigarettes. And so we just wanted to make sure that the changes that we're making with respect to these definitions and permitted uses and special uses, that it was clear that it's really for the individual shop only, not for these businesses that are primarily engaged in other types of sales and activities. In addition to modifying the definition, we're also adding a footnote, superscript 6, which basically adds some additional requirements for these types of uses. One being that they shall not be located within 100 feet of any school, child care facility, public park, or other building used for education or recreational programs for persons under the age of 18 years. And this language actually comes from our municipal code, which under the current municipal code, in order to obtain a tobacco license, you need to meet that requirement. So we thought, since in our zoning ordinance we have other uses that have certain distance restrictions, for example, firearms and ammunition sales, we figured that it would also be appropriate to superscript it in the last section of the ordinance where they talk about uses, so that we can have kind of like a double catch in terms of making sure that we really are conscious of these separation requirements. The other separation requirement, which is new, and this was researched over the moratorium period, was that these uses shall not be located within 1,000 feet of any other tobacco shop, alternative nicotine shop, or vapor shop. And the reason for this separation is to prevent an overconcentration of these similar type uses. And that would mean having 3 or more of these uses existing within 1,000-foot radius of the business. So what we really just want to kind of not see happen is that every shopping center have a vape shop or alternative nicotine shop, or even a tobacco shop for that matter. And then we've described how these distances would be calculated. The next change would be creating and adding specific definitions for a vapor lounge, hookah lounge, cafe, or a cigar bar lounge. We currently are silent on that, and this was kind of brought up because as we looked at the current vape shops that we had approved, we realized that they had this lounge component. And as I did the research during the moratorium period, a lot of communities were kind of deciding whether or not they even wanted to allow the lounge component or just make it strictly a retail-only type of business. So we've decided that we would define what these facilities are, how they are associated, and then we would add them ultimately into the use list. So we've created a definition for vapor lounge. It is to be ancillary to an alternative nicotine shop or vapor shop only. So a lounge could not be, a vapor lounge could not be a standalone type of business. We've also identified hookah lounge or hookah cafe, and these need to be standalone only. So what that would mean is that they cannot be located within a multi-tenant center. They would need to be in a standalone building. Cigar lounge and cigar bar, same thing, standalone only, cannot be located within a multi-tenant center. Now the vapor lounge, it could be in a multi-tenant center as long as it's associated with a vapor shop or an alternative nicotine shop. The last change that we're proposing is adding these uses specifically to the permitted use list. So a vapor lounge as an ancillary use to an alternative nicotine shop or vapor shop only would be a permitted use in C2 and C3, which is currently how these shops are allowed in the ordinance. They'd be noted as an X in the table, and then a special use in the C4 to be noted with a special use. Hookah lounge and hookah cafe as a standalone, as well as cigar lounge and cigar bar as a standalone only. Both would be permitted in a C2 and C3 district, noted with an X, and a special use in the C4 to be noted with an S. So that is what we are proposing. There will be other changes associated with the municipal code, but since that is not under your purview, it's not being presented to you this evening. With that being said, staff is recommending approval of these text amendments related to the definition sections and use list sections for all districts, including C4 downtown commercial as presented.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to have a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Axley, second by Likens. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak or be heard on this particular proposal? Yes, sir. Just step up to the microphone, state your name.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank D'Ambrosio. I am a owner of Strictly Vape, home of the 5 Ohm Vapors on 9th Street, 1163 East 9th Street. And thanks for having me here tonight. I agree with what Pam said in reference to the vape ordinance and e-cig categorizations that she talked about. Just a quick little story about myself. I'm a retired police officer from the town of Cicero. I just retired last month. Back in October of 2014 is when I started vaping. Prior to that, I was having trouble sleeping at night. I had a gurgling in my chest, inflammation, congestion probably from smoking. I smoked for 28 years. And I was having problems as a police officer just walking up a flight of stairs. All my equipment I was wearing, I was out of breath, sweating. It was getting difficult, and I needed to make a change in my life. I turned to e-cigs. I walked into the vapor cabin about a half block away from here and flicked my last cigarette to the curb and said, I'm done. And I started vaping. 2 months later, I started hosting a show on Vapors TV, a live show where many viewers would watch, and I'm still doing that to this day. We give away vaping products. I have sponsors from around the world. We get vaping products in people's hands who can't afford them. I want to say I helped a lot of people, and I'm very confident when I say that. But getting back to my congestion, within a week, it went away. Within a week, walking up that flight of stairs was no big deal. I'm like, yeah, I could do that again, no problem. I immediately started feeling better. It's been a lifestyle change for me. After becoming a host on Vapors TV, I started my own network. They have different networks on Vapors TV. And when I started my own network in May, it grew to the #1 network on Vapors TV. I have hosts from around the country. We do live shows every day of the week. And from there, my partner found me and said, "You are vape famous, and I want you on my team." So me and my wife joined his team, and we opened up our shop here in Lockport. We are doing very well. We don't serve to minors. We card everyone. My employees know this. Most of my clientele is 30 and up. Just so you guys know, most of my clientele is 30 and up. I do have some 18-year-olds that come in. Law states 18 at this point. If it changes to 21, we will not serve to anyone under 21. Since February, when we opened up another shop in May in Downers Grove. Actually, the shop was open. We took it over. Vaping's changed my life, and I know it's going to change millions of people's lives. There is a new documentary out. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's called 1 Billion Lives, and it was presented to members of the Congress last night. And this movie is going to be big. It's a documentary. I don't know if it's going to be in the theaters. It's been released around the world and just released in the United States last night. The guy who made the movie isn't a vapor. He isn't a smoker, but he explains the conspiracy behind what the FDA is trying to do to vaping. Okay, I had a thought on the way here tonight, and I didn't know I was going to come up here and talk. I had Darren tell me to come here, come to the meeting, you know, and I had a thought. Vicks vaporizers, okay, the humidifier where you put the medicine in, and I'm sure everybody here has done that at one point or another in their lives, has chemicals in there that are probably way worse than anybody thinks vaping is. There's 4 to 5 ingredients in vaping, so you all know. Vegetable glycerin, which we put in our bodies every day. It's a moisturizing agent. It's used in many foods. It's used in lotions, soaps. We put this in our bodies every day. Propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is the ingredient that is used in albuterol. It's used in breathing treatments for children who are sick, for adults. It is the component that vaporizes and carries the medicine into your lungs, whatever medicine they put in them, inhalers and stuff. The other is natural flavors, sweeteners, and nicotine. There are vape products out there with 0 nicotine in it. You could get 0 nicotine and just vape flavoring to supplement that sensation of wanting to put a stinky, cancerous cigarette in your mouth. Nicotine taken out of a cigarette is not a carcinogen. Nicotine with all those other carcinogens is poisonous in a cigarette form. Out of a cigarette form, nicotine is a stimulant that's actually good for your brain receptors. I don't know what else to say. Vaping's here to stay. I don't care what the FDA says. I believe they're going to lose this battle against vaping because it is saving lives. 1 billion lives in the next decade. Almost 500,000 lives are lost every year from smoking, cancer from smoking. 1 billion lives in a decade. If you ever have the opportunity to watch this movie, I suggest you do so. You guys have any questions for me?
No?
Well, thanks for having me and listening to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're quite welcome, sir. Is there anyone else in the public that would care to speak on this particular proposal? Seeing and hearing none, have a motion to close the public hearing? So moved. Motion by Axley, second by Likens. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. I'm sorry, Thies. Okay.
If I could also just add
Sure.
something. When we started this whole process, we were not taking it from the position of health. We're taking it from the position of how these types of uses, and not just vape shops, but in general, the whole category of uses, you know, the impact that it has on the community, whether it's someone driving down the street, you know, just from that standpoint. We've not approached it from the health standpoint. I've just provided updates on the federal and the state situations, just as kind of background information. But I just want to enter into the record before the commission that, you know, we have not taken the position of health, good or bad.
Yeah, we're strictly looking at it from the zoning point of view, which I think is, yeah, what the FDA is going to do. No telling at this point. That's completely out of our hands. Mr. Thies, any questions or concerns?
Is there a reason why we wouldn't want to allow, I don't even know what you'd call, in-shop mixing?
Well, from that standpoint, I mean, nicotine has been considered by OSHA as a dangerous chemical. And so it can get absorbed through the skin, and it can cause issues. And I think, you know, even though that's maybe a little health related, I think the general consensus has always been to stay with the prepackaged materials and not to go with having people being able to mix their own.
Mr. Likens?
I know very little about vaping. I've never smoked. Question, we classify this as prepackaged smoking and tobacco products. If someone came in with, quote, a loose tobacco shop where you come in and buy tobacco to roll your own cigarettes, is that not allowed? And maybe that's a naive question, but I just wondered if that ever happens, or?
Well, I'm not an expert, but from just some of the things that I've heard, and I actually attended Homer Glen Village Board meeting when they were discussing this as well, because one of my counterparts was kind of going through the same process as I was. And they were actually entertaining a cigar lounge and cigar bar. And I could be wrong, but I think like rolling cigars and that kind of situation is probably more in line with cigar usage, I'm assuming, as opposed to, you know, like cigarettes and things like that. But obviously, if we had someone that came in, I mean, they would have to, you know, we would have to say no, that you couldn't roll your own. You would have to, it would have to be pre-made.
And I guess my only other question, was whether or not 100 feet is adequate distance from a school or child care facility, public park. Pam, you mentioned that that number is consistent with other distances in regulations?
That is currently comes out of our tobacco ordinance that we have in place with the city.
Because it's 33 yards, it's, throw a baseball that far, just a question.
Do you think that it should be closer then, or
No, I would,
a greater distance?
I would say, if anything, greater.
Well, it would certainly prevent a tobacco shop or the like from being able to open next to a park. If there's a residential park behind the property, that would be precluded from doing it. Or if it's adjacent to some other type of business or educational facility that caters to persons under the age of 18, I mean, that could create an issue.
So those are my only comments, and I appreciate the information from gentleman who has business in Lockport, and certainly understand your views on the FDA. And appreciate that.
I think if I can clarify here a little bit, with pipe tobacco, pipe smoker goes in and buys prepackaged pipe tobacco, takes it home, opens it, smokes his pipe. Cigarette tobacco and rolling papers. If you want to roll your own cigarettes, you buy a package of cigarette tobacco and a package of rolling papers, and you leave and you go home and you roll your cigarettes. So they're still selling it prepackaged. That wouldn't eliminate the sale of prepackaged cigarette tobacco or prepackaged rolling papers.
I guess what you wouldn't want to see is a canister of tobacco leaves that someone just puts a little scoop in and puts it into the bag. You want it, it's already in the bag from the manufacturer.
Okay, Mrs. Wold?
I have no questions right now, but I think, Frank is your name, for your information.
The two that we have now in town, do they conform to all these rules?
The only one that does not is the one that's in downtown, because at the time that one went in, these types of shops were permitted, and then we changed the code, and now they're a special use. So if they were to want to expand or move elsewhere in the downtown area, they would not be allowed to do so without first obtaining a special use permit approval.
So the one with downtown will be allowed to operate, if they, when will that change? If they sell?
If the business ceases to operate for a period of 1 year,
Okay.
that cancels it out. Or if they want, or if they just, voluntarily, move out. But yes, they would not be allowed, if
So if they sell to a different owner within a year?
they could
Okay. I just
continue.
want to make sure we're clear on that,
Yep.
because, in their, definition of the 100 foot from the front of the part of the property, is where Frank says there's a park behind that building, and a little bit to the west.
Well, with the zoning ordinance, and Tom and I have talked about this, and it kind of came up at the council level too. When we're dealing with the zoning ordinance, when the changes occur, at the time the business was a permitted use under the code, then it basically becomes a legal non-conforming. So if, for example, if they were to move out and the business was to cease operating for a period of 1 year, a new business could not move in, because it would be subject to the current codes. Correct, Tom?
That was our discussion, that it's treated as a legal non-conforming use, so it would be allowed to continue. The big risk for any existing owner would be if the building is damaged, substantially damaged, and then replacing it would be an issue, or if he went out of business for a year or more, then at that point the legal status is lost. So that's the risk that a current owner has. We've had that arise in a few situations. For example, a used car lot on 9th Street that went out of business a couple of years ago. Somebody came back in this year, wanted to reinstate the used car lot business. We told them that that's not a legal non-conforming use because of the passage of 1 year. So that would be the situation with the existing stores. So the proposal that would go to the city council would protect existing stores and allow them to continue on. The frequently used term is grandfathered in.
This is just from the zoning standpoint.
I have nothing else.
Okay, Mr. Bellotta?
Tom, on that note, does that ride with the structure or is it ride with the owners? Like if Frank had, one downtown and he wanted to sell to another, but it stayed the same use, that's allowable?
Frank would be allowed to sell it to a subsequent purchaser, yes. So it goes with the building itself, not with the owner.
I have one other question on the definitions, where you get the vape lounge, the hookah lounge, and the cigar lounge, standalone only? Is it, and I think I'm looking at this wrong, you're saying a standalone building only?
Yes, a freestanding building.
So if somebody wanted to do a vape lounge or a hookah lounge or a cigar bar, they couldn't do it in a strip mall?
The hookah lounge, or the vapor lounge, yes, it could be in a multi-tenant center, because we allow vape shops that way. The hookah lounge, or the hookah cafe, or the cigar lounge or cigar bar could not be located in a multi-tenant center. It would have to be in its own freestanding building. So for example, I mean, we don't, unless they wanted to construct an entirely new building, the only commercial option that we have, like right now, if someone wanted to use, for example, the Pizza Hut building for a cigar bar or for a hookah lounge, if they met the parameters of the code, that would be an appropriate place for that type of use. However, they could not locate in a shopping center.
Wow.
Well, theoretically, I think from the cigar bar, I think from that standpoint, I think some of the rulings of tobacco kind of cover that, and I think they don't allow that to be located unless it is a standalone facility. But when we talked with, general discussion with, the council, what we didn't want to see is these types of businesses become the primary source of activity in a particular structure. And because we didn't want to have the impact that it could potentially have on adjacent tenant spaces with having the smoke.
So we have a cigar store in the, I'm trying to think of which shopping center to call it. Reed
Store is
Supply.
fine, the cigar store is fine.
They
They,
smoke cigars there also. So,
they would be grandfathered in,
right, so, but it could never happen again in another
correct,
strip.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned that Pizza Hut building is an example of a freestanding building, the former Stamp Time building, I think it's
Oh,
201
yes.
South State, which was originally a gas station building with 2 service bays. That's zone C2, commercial, and it's a standalone building, so potentially that building could be used for that purpose. And there's probably 1 or 2, there's a few others around, not many,
Right, correct, unless they wanted to construct new.
that are existing freestand.
It's something that, the business, whether we like the product or not, I think is irrelevant, but, it definitely adds to the cost when you talk a standalone versus typically a square foot house.
Although we're saying if, define it as if 30% or more of his business is in these products, that still leaves him in a standalone building to sell almost anything else, wouldn't it?
If at least 30, well, yeah, I mean, they still have to meet the definition, so 30% of their product is that, yes, I mean, theoretically, they could sell other things.
Sure, okay. And I assume you've researched other communities around the area to see what they're doing, if they're doing, this is roughly comparable to what other communities are doing?
No, actually, there's a whole gamut of what other communities are doing.
They're all over the place.
Several neighboring communities, such as New Lenox and Homer Glen, they've actually adopted their own smoke-free ordinances. And so we follow the state. They've actually taken it a step further and have adopted one on their own. So through their own smoke-free ordinance, they've been able to regulate where, and include vapor products and alternative nicotine products, and treat them similar as tobacco, where there's no smoking in public places. So there would be no vaping, no alternative nicotine, smoking, within the place, within 15 feet. So similar to the way the Smoke-Free Act treats tobacco right now. New Lenox, I believe, has placed these uses in industrial districts. Some neighboring communities have focused, or not neighboring, but other communities have focused on just a retail component only. So there could not be any sampling, nor can there be any lounges. Homer Glen has placed a cigar lounge as a standalone building, but they won't allow hookah lounges. And I think the approach they've taken with vapor discussed, I think it would be a retail only kind of component. So again, no sampling and no lounges. So it's been a variety. Some communities, if they don't reference them at all in their zoning ordinance, they're deeming them as not allowed. So they've kind of made that interpretation of their ordinance. And some people have, basically, like how we were initially, really didn't give it much thought and created a definition and just kind of lumped it all together and said, yeah, okay, it's allowed. So we've just taken a different look not as strict as some of our neighboring communities, but we've also feel like we're getting a little bit better control so that it's just not only a permitted by right use, but we're also hoping to license them through our tobacco licensing program, so that we have a little bit more control over where they go and how the operations are conducted.
Would Lockport ever consider going under the tobacco one where they're not allowed in restaurants?
Well, again, these other communities can do these things because they have adopted their own smoke-free ordinances. Now, being a non-home rule community, I'm not sure if we would have that ability to do that, because there are differences on what you can regulate that way. But Homer Glen, even though it's smaller, they are home rule as well as New Lenox, so they do have their own ordinances, which prohibit it and treat it like tobacco.
You mentioned these business, one or two shops do their own compounding or on site that you're not allowing. Does that mean that they'll compound a particular product to order for the customer?
Well, in the shops that mix,
Yeah.
they mix their own liquids for their clients, based on their preferences, their clients' preferences. And there's a shop on Archer Avenue that does that.
Right. I mean, it sounds like, almost like filling a prescription. The customer comes in and I want this particular blend, they make it for him right then,
Yes, they would blend it, yes.
because otherwise, he could compound it at home and package it at home and bring it to the store and say it's prepackaged.
Well, again, I mean, I think that's where we don't want to get caught up in that trick bag, and that's why we
Sure.
said we're
Okay.
just gonna keep it as prepackaged. So we don't want our businesses in Lockport to be conducted in that fashion.
Section 134, 152 of the muni code, that's just, as it relates to, that's definition, is that?
Yes.
Or changing on the definition here, is that?
Yeah, what's happening is, there are, like I said, municipal code amendments. This particular section, is the definition section in that part of the code. And currently, there's a definition for, I think, tobacco products and something to do with smoking. And so what we're doing is we're gonna be defining, the alternative nicotine products and the vapor products in that section of the code, because it's ultimately, we're hoping to license them. So it'll just be a cross-reference.
Does that get in detail on ventilation and all that good stuff on that one?
When we discuss the municipal code changes, there is a section on there that would require that businesses do install some sort of exhaust system. We haven't, and Tom and I are actually still going through that part of the report, but there would be a requirement that there would have to be some sort of smoke / vape mist exhaust system or something similar. We don't know that we're gonna get into specific details on how that's to be done, as opposed to just making sure that some sort of system is in there to help to evacuate out that billowy mist or smoke look that you kind of get from the street when there's a lot of people in there conducting that activity.
I would think there'd be a section in the Illinois, or, the IBC, International Building Code.
Yeah, it doesn't, but it doesn't approach exhaust systems from the standpoint of these types of uses. I did consult with Keith to see what kind of options were available. I have reached out to some vape shops to find out what kind of systems, they've considered or that are out there. So I have, done some research on it. And again, Tom and I are kind of deciding how much specific detail we want to go into in terms of the specific system, or do we want just some sort of system that addresses the issue of making sure you don't get that billowy, smoky look as you go past the facility. Because that was one of the questions or issues that had come up when we were doing general discussion at the council level, was that some people had said, yeah, well, I've gone past shops and I've pulled up and I've seen nothing but smoke in the window. How do we not have that happen? And then someone had said, well, what about when it is in a multi-tenant building, to make sure it doesn't have an impact on the adjacent, tenants. So that's kind of how that's evolved, but it will be handled through the municipal code.
I've never vaped. It's moisture, right? I mean, it's liquid?
It's a mist. No, it's a mist.
So it's a mist. The hookah, obviously, that's tobacco, that's like. That's tobacco, right? Thank you.
Okay, staff is recommending approval of the text amendments as presented. Can I have a motion to that effect?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mr. Oxley, second by Mr. Thies. Any discussion on the motion? Have a roll call vote, please, on the motion.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Motion carries. And this will go to the city council, what,
Next week.
next week? Okay, any other business, any citizens to be heard on any other matters? Saying, any-
And, some residents brought up the lighting at the ML Realty building. Last meeting, do we have any?
Oh, yes, and that was discussed at the council level as a follow-up. They turned them off on purpose. ML did, in response to
Yeah.
the concerns and complaints. So they just didn't go out and they're gonna come back on. They were purposely turned off.
Well, I mean, so far they've been great neighbors. And that's good. Okay. That's all I have.
okay, thank you. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved, second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. We're done.